does vocabulary affect reading, and what can parents and teachers do to encourage vocabulary acquisition? I'm Dr. Emily Sherwood. If you're interested in literacy from a global perspective, please like and subscribe. So the last pillar in our 5 pillars of reading is vocabulary. And vocabulary is word knowledge. And if you grew up in the United States, or in the 80s, 90s, even in the 2000s, even today, you probably are used to learning vocabulary by memorizing words. So, for example, the teacher might give out 10 words a week from a story that the class is reading or from the textbook, and the student would have to memorize those words and their meanings. Or if it was content area, if it was something like math, science, social studies, there might be a list of words for the unit. I remember having to write down definitions and examples in my world geography class of different things, of different terms when I was in high school. That, and if you are watching and you have any experience learning in many Asian countries, you probably memorized long lists of words, and you probably direct translated them. So you had the word in your language and the word in English, and you would have to memorize long lists of words, sometimes even 50 to 100 words. And while that does work, you can learn words that way, really the best way to learn vocabulary is incidentally. That means just by exposure, by seeing the words. And the best way research shows to do that is by reading. So if you memorize long lists of words, or you have a few words a week, that's really boring most of the time. And you don't really see the words in context. In other words, you don't see them in action. You just kind of memorize them in isolation on their own. And research shows that's not the best way. Whereas if you read and you see the words in a paragraph, maybe as part of a story, then you're more likely to remember those words. But it takes multiple exposures. That means you have to see the words over and over, and words that you don't see every day. But the main researcher about vocabulary and second language learning is Stephen Krashen. He's mostly an English language acquisition specialist. That's what his degree is in, that's what he studied, and that's what he taught for many years. So Stephen Krashen did a very famous study in the late 1980s with immigrant women from Asia, mostly Korean women, and he called it the Sweet Valley Studies. He worked with another researcher named Cho. So they studied these women who were immigrants, again mostly Korean women, and they were housewives, and they were very unconfident in their English abilities. They felt really shy about their English. They had no confidence. And it really limited what they wanted to do. And so these women started reading what's called the Sweet Valley series. And for those of you who grew up in the 80s, you may be familiar with these series. This was a very famous series, and now it's like unheard of, which is crazy because it was very, very famous and very, very popular in the 1980s. And it was a story of 2 twins. That means sisters that were born on the same day. Jessica and Elizabeth, and just their adventures in school and in life and everyday things that happened to them. And this was an ideal book for these women to read, series for these women to read, because it had Sweet Valley Kids, which was the twins when they were in grade school, upper elementary school, probably 4th or 5th grade. It had Sweet Valley Twins, which was when they were in middle school, and then there was Sweet Valley High, which was in high school. And so the women started reading on Sweet Valley Kids, and then as time went on, they were able to actually read higher and higher. So they made this really big gain in vocabulary. They became more confident in their English, and they were able to be more involved with their community and achieve their personal goals. And so this study was really famous and pretty shocking to the English learner community, because there was this idea that learning vocabulary had to be really hard and that you had to memorize words. And so that's really the really famous study that shows about reading. And so reading is considered the best way to learn vocabulary. And so you may be wondering, well, my child doesn't like to read. And this is something I hear a lot, especially with students who may struggle, or students who are English learners, or who may be diagnosed with disabilities. Your child may unfortunately have a negative relationship with reading in English. And what I suggest to parents always is to find something the child likes. We talked in the last video about comprehension and how schema, which means something that the child knows about and maybe has an interest in, is good. So something that the child has an interest in or knows something about, preferably both, something the child likes and knows a bit about, and find something around that child's level. As I put in the last video, you don't want to be very strict about these levels. If it's something your child likes, for example, I've worked with a lot of boys who like soccer and basketball. Basketball is a big sport in China, and soccer is a big sport in Latin America and Europe. And so I had kids who really liked these sports, and they could read at a higher level than they could if they were reading about a textbook or some academic concept that they really didn't care about, which is unfortunately, that's a lot of school reading. But that's considered the best way to learn vocabulary and also to become a better reader. It also improves comprehension. And we see that in the Sweet Valley study, so women also went way up in their reading level. So whereas before they had to read Sweet Valley Kids, which I think is at about a second grade level, it's fairly low. They were able to eventually get to Sweet Valley High, which is meant for high schoolers. But whenever anybody asks me how to learn English the most, I say read. And this is why. Because the research shows this is the best way. So that's the end of this series. And if you have any questions, comments, please write in the description box, or you can in the comment box, or you can always message me. I would love to talk to you more about reading. And please continue to like and subscribe, because I'm going to continue to have content about literacy and language and educational policy. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Keep learning.